يقول راجي
أعوذ
رحمة
بالله السميع
الغفور
العليم من الشيطان
دوما
الرجيم
سليمان
من
هو
همزه ونفثه
الجزري
ونفخه
الحمد
بسم الله
لله
الرحمن الرحيم
مصليا
رب
على
اشرح لي صدري
محمد
ويسر لي أمري
وآله
واحلل
ومن
عقدة من لساني
تلا
يفقهوا قولي أما بعد
وبعد
السلام
هذا
عليكم ورحمة
المفروض
الله وبركاته.
المريد
Today we welcome you all
بالنون
back to our Sharh
والتنوين
Manzuma Tuhfah
والمدود
Al-Atfal, and this will be
سميته
our 12th lesson
بتحفة
where we'll be looking at the
الأفهام
examples
عن
for
شيخنا
Al-Idgham, and of course we've
الميري
looked at the two types of
بالكمال.
Idgham. We also looked at Al-Idh'haar al-Mutlaq, which is a resultant effect from the scenario that occurs when you have Nuun Saakinah and a Tanween coming together or coming in contact with letters of Idh'haar in the same word. In that scenario, we are not allowed to do the Idgham, so we call that scenario or that phenomenon, we refer to it as Al-Idh'haar al-Mutlaq. If you've not forgotten, we looked at the two types of Al-Idgham bi ghayri ghunnah and Al-Idgham bi ghunnah. Also, we remember that we reminded ourselves that Al-Idgham bi ghayri ghunnah is referred to as Al-Idgham al-Kamil, and Al-Idgham bi ghunnah is referred to as Al-Idgham al-Naqis, the incomplete Idgham. And the reason for this name is something we've looked at and we've discussed in detail. Without wasting much of our time, just as we've done for Al-Idh'haar, we're going to be moving on to do the same thing for Al-Idgham by looking at the examples for each of these types of Al-Idgham. And it's important for us to note that the examples do not only just look at scenarios where we have the Nuun Saakinah coming before letters of Al-Idgham, but as well we try to look at scenarios where we have Nuun Saakinah or Tanween coming before letters of Al-Idgham. We compare this side by side in the two types of Al-Idgham, which is Al-Naqis and Al-Kamil, as we'll see in the slides that follow. فأمثلة إدغام النون الساكنة والتنوين بغير غنة. The examples we'll be looking at now are examples of إدغام النون الساكنة والتنوين بغير غنة, meaning examples of Al-Idgham بغير غنة, meaning we'll be looking at scenarios or verses where Nuun Sakinah or Tanween comes in contact with letters of Al-Idgham بغير غنة. And if you've not forgotten, letters of Idgham بغير غنة are two, and those two letters, if you've not forgotten, are Lam and we have Ra as well. So this Lam and Ra are the two letters of Idgham. This, as we have them here, Lam and Ra are the two letters of Al-Idgham. And the first examples we have here is the example where it says in the Glorious Qur'an, بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم ولم يكن له ولم يكن له. If we pay attention properly, we can see that there's a Nuun Sakinah here, and the letter that comes after it is a letter of Idgham. But if we investigate further, we find out that this letter of Idgham falls under the Idgham without Ghunnah, which is Al-Idgham bighayri Ghunnah, and that's Lam. So this Lam here, because it's a letter of Idgham bighayri Ghunnah, the message we get, or what's expected of us, is to pronounce it without any form of Ghunnah, as the name implies, without Ghunnah. So we're going to be doing the insertion or the assimilation of the Nuun into this Lam without making any form of Ghunnah, meaning we are entering the Nuun itself into the Lam, and as well as its quality or its attributes, which is Ghunnah, into the Lam. Remember the metaphor of someone entering into a house but not leaving their shoes. So the same way, this Nuun and its attributes, or its shoes in this case, will be entered into the Lam, so that when we pronounce it, the Lam will be completely gone. No sign of Ghunnah of the Nuun will be left when we are done pronouncing that. So the right pronunciation would be وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ. When we look at this, it's as though we do not have Nuun there in the first place. So we pronounce it saying يَكُنْ لَهُ يَكُنْ لَهُ. Although we do not overpronounce the shadda of the Nuun such that we now make a Ghunnah sound out of it. So it's going to be وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ. And if you look at this, this is an example of Idgham bighayri Ghunnah, because the letter coming after the Nuun Sakinah is a Lam, and Lam is a letter of Al-Idgham bighayri Ghunnah. That's number one. Number two is, if we look at these two things, the Nuun Sakinah and the Lam, which is the letter of Idgham, they both appear in two different words. Yakun being the first word and lahu being the second word. So for that reason, we are allowed to observe al-idgham bighayri gunnah. Now, moving on, we'll look at the next example. It says, كَلَّا لَئِن لَّمْ يَنْتَهِ كَلَّا لَئِن لَّمْ يَنْتَهِ. Again, we have a Nuun Saakinah here, and the letter that follows in a different word is letter lam, and as we all know, letter lam is a letter of idgham, and when we dig deeper, we observe or we know that letter lam is a letter of idgham bighayri gunnah, meaning idgham without gunnah. That means we are going to be entering the Nuun into the lam without any form of gunnah. So it says, كَلَّا لَئِن لَّمْ يَنْتَهِ. What that means is that we will be pronouncing the Nuun in such a way that it's almost understood, or it's almost as if it does not exist in the first place. So we say, كَلَّا لَئِن لَّمْ يَنْتَهِ. If we look further in this verse, we can see a Nuun Saakinah, a different Nuun Saakinah, but the letter that comes after it is the letter ta. So when we say yantahi, when we look at letter ta, we do not find letter ta amongst the letters of Al-Idh'haar. The same way we do not find it amongst the letters of Al-Idgham, Yarmaluna. It's not there. So letter ta falls under a different ruling from amongst the rulings we've looked at. And that's why we are not looking into it, just in case we are wondering. And the next example we're looking at says, Ar-ra'ahu istaghna. Ar-ra'ahu istaghna. So this one, we have a Nuun Saakinah here as usual. Then the letter that follows is letter Ra. And if we remember, Yarumaluna being divided into two leaves us with Lam and Ra falling under Al-Idgham bighayri gunnah, Idgham without gunnah, meaning this Nuun here will be entered into the Ra in such a way that there will be no nasalization or gunnah pronounced. So that says, Ar-ra'ahu istaghna. Ar-ra'ahu istaghna. So that's how we pronounce that. And also we pay attention and notice that the Nuun Saakinah is not appearing in the same word with this. Another example that we have here is ayahsabu allam yarahu ahad. Ayahsabu allam yarahu ahad. Now if we look at this, the Nuun Saakinah also appears in a different word, and the lam appears after the Nuun Saakinah. Because lam is a letter of al-idgham bighayri gunnah, we insert the Nuun into the lam without pronouncing any gunnah. The next example we're looking at is yusqawna min rahiqin makhtum. Yusqawna min rahiqin makhtum. If we look at this Nuun Saakinah, and the letter after it is a letter Ra, which is the letter of idgham bighayri gunnah, that explains why we pronounce this as though there is no Nuun there in the first place, because the Nuun is completely entered into the Ra. Now, next set of examples are examples where we have Tanween coming in contact with letters of Al-Idgham bighayri gunnah. So we have this example that says, Fawailul lil musallin. Remember that in every Tanween is a Nuun Saakinah, a fact which we've established. So Fawailun, that's the word. Fawailun with a Nuun Saakinah. But then because we are adding it, or it comes in contact with a letter that's a letter of idgham, the Nuun in that Tanween is entered completely into this lam that's in green. So we say Fawailul lil musallin. Fawailul lil musallin. Like that. And next example we have Fi aishatir radiyah. Fi aishatir radiyah. So the ta has a Tanween, and as we've said, every Tanween has a Nuun Saakinah. But then in this case, the Nuun Saakinah has been entered completely into this Ra, because Ra is a letter of Al-Idgham bighayri gunnah, and for such letters we do not observe idgham with gunnah. So we do not make this assimilation with a gunnah. So that explains why we entered the Nuun Saakinah inside this Tanween into the Ra completely, such that the Nuun Saakinah is not even noticed. Not the letter and not the attribute called gunnah. And the next example we have is In kullu nafsin lamma alayha hafiz. In kullu nafsin lamma alayha hafiz. If you look at this, we have a Nuun Saakinah here, and this Nuun Saakinah comes in contact with a letter here, which is letter kaf. But if we investigate, we cannot find letter kaf amongst letters of al-idh'haar. The same way, we cannot find letter kaf amongst letters of al-idgham. That means this is not what we're looking for. But then we have a tanween here. And as we've said before, every tanween has a Nuun Saakinah. Then it's important we look at the letter that comes after it. The letter that comes after it is a letter lam, and that's a letter of al-idgham bi ghayri ghunnah, meaning we'll be entering the Nuun Saakinah in this tanween into the lam, but without a ghunnah. So that explains why we said nafsil lamma, nafsil lamma, as if there is no tanween there. That's the essence of Nuun Saakinah or al-idgham bi ghayri ghunnah. That's just how we pronounce it. The other example we're looking at now is يَجِدَ لَهُ شِهَابًا رَصَدًا. يَجِدَ لَهُ شِهَابًا رَصَدًا. In this tanween, for Satan, we have a Nuun Saakinah, and that we already know. But letter that comes after it is a letter ra, and ra is a letter of idgham bi ghayri ghunnah. So that explains why we are not saying شِهَابًا رَصَدًا. That will be wrong, because the Nuun Saakinah is to be entered into the ra alongside with its ghunnah. So you do not say shihaban, no, there will be no ghunnah. But so that will say shihabar rasada, as if there is no tanween there in the first place. And the reason for doing this is something we've looked at in the previous episode. Now the next example is وَاتَّبَعُوا مَن لَّمْ يَزِدْهُ. وَاتَّبَعُوا مَن لَّمْ يَزِدْهُ. So if you look at this, وَاتَّبَعُوا مَن لَّمْ يَزِدْهُ. مَن لَّم, here we have a Nuun Saakinah, and after it we have a lam. The Nuun Saakinah, of course, has been entered into this lam to give us that effect. So if we look at these examples, all of the ones here have Nuun Saakinah coming before one of the letter of al-idgham bi ghayri ghunnah, while all of the examples here have tanween coming before one of the letters of al-idgham bi ghayri ghunnah. And for that reason, we are not allowed to pronounce with ghunnah. Rather, we enter the tanween or the Nuun Saakinah, or even the Nuun Saakinah in the tanween into the letter of idgham bi ghayri ghunnah, which is either lam or ra, completely, such that the Nuun Saakinah is not heard, and as well the ghunnah, which is the attribute of the Nuun Saakinah, is not heard, not in the Nuun Saakinah and not in the tanween. And if we pay attention, we notice that the examples we brought are for the three tanweens. We have the Dhammatan here, and we have the Kasratan, and as well we have the Fathatan. So there's basically no difference when it comes to entering a Nuun Saakinah in tanween into any of the letters of idgham. Now we move further to look at examples of al-idgham bi ghunnah, which is the second type of idgham. But then we remember that idgham bi ghunnah has to do with idgham Nuun Saakinah or tanween, because those are the things we are actually assimilating. Those are the things we are entering. We are doing the idgham of Nuun Saakinah and tanween into the letters of idgham bi ghunnah. So we want to look at examples where Nuun Saakinah or tanween come in contact with the letters of idgham bi ghunnah. And if you remember, the letters of idgham bi ghunnah are four that we have in this word. Yanmu, we have ya, we have noon, we have mim, and we have waw. These four are the letters of al-idgham bi ghunnah. So we want to look at scenarios where we have Nuun Saakinah or tanween coming in contact with any of these four letters. And we should remember that in Nuun Saakinah, coming in contact with any of these four letters have a condition to it. There's a condition for Nuun Saakinah or tanween whenever it comes in contact with the letters of idgham bi ghunnah. Remember the statement of the poet where he says, إِلَّا إِذَا كَانَ بِكِلْمَةٍ فَلَا تُدْغِمْ خَذُنِّيَ سُمَّ سُنْوَانٍ تَلَا. Meaning, it's only allowed for you to observe idgham bi ghunnah whenever the Nuun Saakinah or tanween comes in contact with any of yanmu, but in different words. If this happens in the same word, then we are not allowed to do the idgham. Rather, we fall back to the ruling we've looked at, which is called al-Idh'haar al-mutlaq. So now let's get started with looking at the examples of al-idgham bi ghunnah. And the first one we have here is أَيَحْسَبُ أَن لَّن يَقْدِرَ. أَيَحْسَبُ أَن لَّن يَقْدِرَ. If you look at this, we have two Nuun Saakinahs. The first one, Nuun Saakinah, and the next one that comes after it is a lam al-mushaddada, a lam that has shadda. But we know that lam is not a letter of idgham bi ghunnah. Rather, lam is a letter of idgham bi ghayri ghunnah. And that's why this was read Allah, Allah. And the mistake that is usually committed by people or beginners when they read this verse is when they have done the idgham al-kamil of Nuun Sakinah into this lam, they then go on to do the same thing here, not keeping in mind that the ya or the letter that comes after the Nuun Sakinah, the second Nuun Sakinah in this case, is a letter of al-idgham bi ghunnah. So here we are not allowed to do ghunnah in the first one, but then in the second scenario we are allowed to do ghunnah because the letter that comes after the Nuun Sakinah here is a letter of idgham bi ghunnah, and we are allowed to do ghunnah. It fulfills the condition of not appearing in the same word. So for that reason, we are allowed to do ghunnah. So we say lanya, lanya. So you see the noon is gone, but the attribute called ghunnah, assimilation, still remains. So when one listens to you, when you say lanya, they can tell without doubt that there's a noon there. As opposed to when someone says Allah and they're just listening, they can't say it. There's no way to tell that there's a noon there at all because the noon with its attributes have been entered into the lam in the first situation. But in the second scenario, we do not enter the noon completely into the ya because it's a letter of idgham bi ghunnah and idgham and naqis. So we say lanya. Again, we'll be reading this verse one more time just so we get it. Ayahsabu al-lanya. Ayahsabu al-lanya qadira. That's for that. We'll move on to the next example. It says min dunillahi min waliyyin wala nasir. Here we have a lot of Nuun Sakinahs to unpack. The first one we have a Nuun Sakinah here, and the letter that comes after it is a dal. If we look at dal, dal does not appear in letter of al-idh'haar. It doesn't appear in letters of al-idgham, yarmaluna. We cannot find dal there. That means it has its ruling that we are yet to look at. So we leave that. And the next one is this noon. We look at this noon. The letter that comes after it is the letter waw. And when we remember that the letters of al-idgham bi ghayri ghunnah are lam and ra, so we know that this has to do with ghunnah because it falls under this yanmu, and it's in fact the last letter of yanmu. So that means we'll be entering this noon into the waw with a ghunnah, meaning the ghunnah should be hard. So we say mewa. So a listener will be able to tell without doubt that there's a noon there by listening or by hearing, by paying attention to the ghunnah that is pronounced by the reciter. So mewa, mewali. When we look at this second example, it's a tanween, and as we've always said, in every tanween there is a Nuun Sakinah. So the Nuun Sakinah there is entered into this waw in such a way that the ghunnah remains. So waliyyin wala nasir, min waliyyin wala nasir. That's the second example. Moving on, we have the next example that says fi jidha hablum min masad. Fi jidha hablum min masad. Now we have two scenarios here. The first one, we have a tanween, and in the tanween, of course, we know this is Nuun Sakinah, but the letter that follows is a mim, and mim, without doubt, is the third letter when we say yanmu. So mim, of course, is a letter of idgham bi ghunnah, meaning we are going to be entering the tanween in this place into the mim with ghunnah. So we say habelum mim, habelum mi, habelum mi. That's that for us. We observe ghunnah here, and we have a Nuun Sakinah here, and the next letter is a letter mim. Now, Nuun Sakinah entered into mim because mim is a letter of idgham bi ghunnah. We have to do that with ghunnah as well. So it says mim masad, fi jidha hablum min masad. That's that. Then moving on to the next example, it says فذكر إن نفعت الذكرى فذكر إن نفعت الذكرى. So you look at this, we have a Nuun Sakinah being entered into another noon. That's amazing. We have Nuun Sakinah and we entered into a different noon. So the noon, first Nuun Sakinah has the attribute called ghunnah, and the second Nuun Sakinah has the attribute called ghunnah. So in fact, there's no way to enter this Nuun Sakinah into the next Nuun Sakinah without ghunnah being made apparent. So So that even makes things easy. So we say innafa'ati. There's no way you could do that without pronouncing ghunnah. That's just that for that. Although it's still an example of idgham bi ghunnah. And next example we have min nutfatin khalaqahu faqaddarah. Min nutfatin khalaqahu faqaddarah. When you look at this is the same example as what we've said, but then we have a tanween here. Since we know that every tanween has Nuun Saakinah, it's important for us to look at the next letter. The next letter here is kha. But if you look at kha is not a letter of al-idgham bi ghunnah. It's not in yanmu. When we look at idgham bi ghayri ghunnah, lam and ra, kha is not there. But when we look at the letters of al-idh'haar al-halqi, we can find kha there. Hamzun faha'un thumma aynun ha'u muhmalatan thumma ghaynun kha'u. So kha is a letter of idgham. That explains why I pronounce this tanween without nasalization, because al-idh'haar is all about pronouncing letters without nasalization from their point of articulation. So I say min nutfatin khalaqahu faqaddaru. That's that for that. Moving on, we have wa nafsin wa ma sawwaha. So we have a tanween here. Although we have a noon here, but the noon has no sukun. So we have no business with that. We have a tanween that has Nuun Saakinah. Next letter is a letter waw, and that letter waw, of course, is a letter of idgham bi ghunnah. We say wa nafsin wa ma sawwaha with ghunnah. Next example we have ila rabbiki radiyatan mardiyah. Ila rabbiki radiyatan. The ta here has Nuun Saakinah, and the mim, of course, is a letter of idgham bi ghunnah. Entering that into this gives us idgham bi ghunnah. So what we did here is idgham of tanween into mim with ghunnah. That's how it's called. While for these ones here, we have idgham of Nuun Saakinah into whatever letter they come after. So if we look at this tanween here, this is actually the last letter of the verse, but then we know that the standard is to convert this ta marbuta into a ha. So and that's why we said marudiyah. Otherwise, if I were to recite this verse, joining it with the next verse, if the letter coming after this ta, the letter of idh'haar, then the ruling for me will be idh'haar. If it's letter of idgham, the ruling for me would be an idgham. That's just so we know. Moving forward, we have wujuhi yawma idhin na'imah. Wujuhi yawma idhin na'imah. We have a lot of tanweens here. Now let's look at them one after the other. Here we have domatan, and in this domatan here, it has Nuun Saakinah. But the next letter is a letter ya, and ya is letter of idgham bi ghunnah, so we have to pronounce that with ghunnah. Then the next tanween we have here is kasratan. Of course, it has Nuun Saakinah, and this is also a noon. So that, as I've said, it's a premium type of idgham because there's no way you can do without pronouncing this idgham. And for this is the last tanween of the word, because ta marbuta we are not pronouncing it. And even if it were a different letter, because we're not joining to the next letter of the next verse, so we do not really have much problem with that. So we have wujuhun yawma idhin na'imah. Then the next thing we have is bima sabaru jannatan wa harira. Jannatan wa harira. It's a win here. Nuun Saakinah. Looking at the next letter waw, what do? We pronounce this with a ghunnah, just as we explained in the previous one. Then we have this one that says فَأَخَذْنَاهُ أَخْذًا وَبِيلًا. So tanween أَخْذًا wa. If you look at this, sometimes we see shadda being written on some of them, or sometimes we do not see shadda. In the situation of noon and mim, shadda is usually placed because of the severity of the ghunnah in those cases. Because as I've said, those letters have ghunnah in themselves, and you have ghunnah coming from the tanween or the Nuun Saakinah from the other word. So when you join the two together, it becomes a very serious type of ghunnah, and that's why the shadda is placed to emphasize the ghunnah you are going to be doing when you observe the rom there. But for other letters, shadda is not usually added because the ghunnah there is not as emphasized as the ghunnah when you have noon or mim coming after a Nuun Saakinah or a tanween. So these are the examples of the rom of Nuun Saakinah and tanween with ghunnah and without ghunnah. The next thing I'd like us to look at is the way tanween of idgham is written. And this is something that I had delayed till this time when we recite the Quran. You notice that whenever a tanween comes before a letter of idgham, the way the tanween is written is usually very different from whenever it comes before letters of Al-Idh'haar. So I would like us to use this moment to look at them so that we pay attention. These are ways to just remind us, they are pointers to remind us of the need of observing the Idgham so that we do not forget. If we look at the Fathatan, whenever it comes in contact with a letter of Idgham, the way it's written is not exactly equal. We see they're slightly placed beside each other. You see the Fathatan here, the next letter is Waw, and the Waw's letter of Idgham be ghunnah. So you see the Fathatan there is not equal. Let's move further to look at another one, Shihab al-Rasada. Look at this Fathatan. When you compare it to this one, it's not equal. The reason for that is nothing other than the fact that later it comes in contact with is a letter of Idgham. So they did that to make you remember and wonder, to draw your attention to the fact that you have to observe something here. That's how the Fathatan of Idgham is written. Although this is not peculiar to only Idgham, we'll look at others when we get there, inshallah. As for Kasratan, you can see how equal Kasratan is meant to be. When we look at this Kasratan here, Yawma'idhin Na'ima, because the next letter is letter of Idgham, the Kasratans are not placed equally. But Nafsin wa ma sawwaha, the same thing is applicable here because of this Waw. Then when we look at the Dhammatan, sometimes Dhammatan is usually written with double Dhamma, but at times it's written in such a way that the second one is inverted, which is kind of what we have here. But whenever the Dhammatan comes in contact with the letter of Idgham, the Dhammatan is written with a double Dhamma, clearly, as we have here. Qasamulli. The next letter is letter of Idgham, and the Dhammatan is written with, as you can see here, a double Dhamma, without an inverted one. While this one, Rasulum, you can see the double Dhammas. Why? Because we have letter of Idgham coming after it. And here we have Fathatan. You can see it's not equal. Why is that? That's because next letter is letter of Idgham. So these are things that are delayed till now just to serve as aid and as pointer for us. When we recite the Quran, these have been placed, strategically placed there for us to draw our attention to the fact that we need to observe these rulings. But how would we know if we do not learn these rulings in the first place, and then we now get to know what these signs mean when we recite the Quran? I would also use this opportunity to show us the examples of Al-Idh'haar, the Tanween of Al-Idh'haar, how the Tanween of Al-Idh'haar is being written. We know this how Tanween is meant to be. Let's look at when it comes in contact with a letter of Idh'haar. So when the Fathatan comes in contact with letter of Idh'haar, for instance, we have Ha here, we have letter Ha. This Tanween, as we can see, is equal. When we compare that with the Tanween of Idgham, we see the difference, right? Now, when we look at this again, we can see Fathatan here, equally written, equally placed. Why? Because the next letter is letter of Idh'haar. Whereas for Idgham, it's not equal. That's Fathatan. When we look at Kasratan as well, it's equal here because the next letter Kha is a letter of Idgham. When we look at this as well, it's equal here because the next letter is the letter of Idgham, which is Al-Ain. Then how about Dhammatan? Dhammatan, as I've said, can be written at times with one Dhamma and the second one being inverted. So if you look at this, for instance, this is Dhammatan, and that's written in that format because the next letter is Ha, which is letter of Idh'haar. Under Dhammatan here, that's written in that format because the next letter is letter of Ha, is letter of Idh'haar, which is letter Ha. So these are there to guide us that when we recite the Quran, we pay attention to these things. In case you've forgotten the alphabet, the publishers of the Quran we have today, out of their wisdom, place these signs there for us to remind us, just in case we are still at that stage where we struggle with remembering these letters. So let's not forget, for Idgham, the Fathatan and Kasratan are not equal when they come in contact with letters of Idgham. But for Idh'haar, the Fathatan and Kasratan are equal when they come in contact with letters of Idh'haar. While for Dhammatan, the Dhammatan of Idgham is a double Dhamma, clearly written one on top of the other when they come in contact with letters of Idgham. But for Idh'haar, it's one Dhamma and the second one inverted, as we have here, whenever they come in contact with letters of Idh'haar. The same thing we have here and the same thing we have here. So whenever we recite the Quran, as we go out there to recite the Quran, these are the things that help us to remember these rulings, and they are there for our own use. We ask Allah to make it easy for us. We ask Allah to make us people of the Quran. We ask Allah to bless us with the tajweed of His book that says, وَرَتِّلِ الْقُرْآنَ تَرْتِيلًا. May Allah make us amongst those who recite the Quran with tawtil. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.